When Hurricane Delilah turned our neighborhood into a war zone, my house was the only one left standing. You'd think that would make me a hero. Instead, the HOA president accused me of causing the hurricane, yes, you heard that right, and slapped me with a $13 million lawsuit for weather manipulation and aesthetic terrorism. I know, I couldn't make this up if I tried. The kicker? She actually believed her own nonsense. Or at least she needed everyone else to believe it badly enough to hand over cash. Lots of it. Honest question. If your neighbor's homes got wrecked and yours didn't, would you feel guilty? Drop your thoughts below. I need to know I'm not crazy. Also, where are you watching from? If you've got an HOA story that tops this, I'm buying you a virtual coffee. Comment your city and let's compare nightmares. Let me back up and tell you how I ended up in this mess. My name's Jake Morrison, and 6 months before Hurricane Delilah tried to delete Florida from the map, I was just a divorced structural engineer trying to start over in Coral Springs Estates. You know that feeling when you walk into a place and immediately know you don't belong? That's how I felt moving into this waterfront community, where the average home costs more than most people make in a decade. But I'd gotten lucky. Picked up a foreclosure for half price after the previous owner discovered his luxury house had the structural integrity of a graham cracker castle. The smell of fresh concrete became my weekend cologne. For 18 months, I spent every spare hour retrofitting that house with hurricane defenses that would make NOAA engineers weep with joy. Impact windows rated for Category 5 winds, reinforced roof strapping that could anchor a battleship, an elevated foundation that laughed at 20-foot storm surge. My neighbors thought I was building a bunker. The constant hammering and drilling every weekend didn't exactly win friends. But I'd seen what hurricanes do to houses built like expensive cardboard boxes, and most of Coral Springs looked exactly like that. That's when I met Vivian Blackwood. Picture the most terrifying HOA president you can imagine, then multiply by 10. Vivian was 58, impeccably dressed even at dawn, driving a pearl-white Mercedes she probably polished with homeowner tears. 6 consecutive years as HOA president, ruling our waterfront kingdom with a 73-page covenant she quoted like Holy Scripture. "Mr. Morrison," she purred during our first encounter, her voice carrying all the warmth of an IRS audit, "your fortress is quite ambitious." I stood in my driveway, concrete dust coating my work clothes, the salt air mixing her expensive perfume with the scent of construction. Around us, million-dollar homes gleamed like jewelry boxes, beautiful, delicate, and absolutely defenseless. "Just hurricane prep," I said. "All permitted, all code compliant." Her smile could have frozen hell. "Of course. Though I'm concerned your excessive modifications make our community's other homes appear inadequate." There it was, the opening shot. Within 72 hours, I had 5 violation notices. My hurricane straps were unsightly exterior modifications. My impact windows violated architectural harmony. My reinforced foundation created unacceptable elevation disparities. Each violation carried a $5,000 fine, payable immediately. But here's the kicker. Vivian offered to make it all disappear for a one-time architectural consultation fee of $25,000. Cash only, no receipts. I should have told her where to shove her consultation fee. Instead, I paid. Because I was the outsider, the newcomer, and I just wanted to finish my storm prep before hurricane season arrived. The crunch of gravel became my weekend soundtrack as Vivian's Mercedes circled my property like a predator. She'd measure things with a ruler, photograph every bolt and bracket, searching for new violations like a treasure hunter seeking gold. But I kept working. Every evening after engineering shifts, every weekend, every holiday, because I'd lived through Hurricane Andrew in '92 and I knew what was coming. The ocean was warming, the atmospheric patterns shifting, and Florida had been too quiet too long. What I didn't know. While I was building fortress-level hurricane protection, my neighbors were living in houses constructed by Vivian's husband's development company. Houses that looked like architectural masterpieces, but had been built with the structural integrity of movie sets. Blackwood Development had cut every corner they could find, then invented new corners to cut. Fake hurricane straps made of tin foil, concrete mixed with 50% sand, roof trusses held together with construction adhesive and prayer. Vivian knew. She'd always known. Because when you're married to the builder, you know exactly which houses will survive the next big storm, and which ones will crumble like sandcastles. By the time Hurricane Delilah appeared on weather radar, Coral Springs Estates was a $200 million disaster waiting to happen. Perfect lawns, pristine facades, and underneath it all, the biggest construction fraud in Florida history. And me? I was about to become the only witness left standing. 3 months later, Hurricane Delilah came knocking with the subtlety of a freight train loaded with chainsaws. Category 4. Sustained winds at 150 miles per hour. Storm surge predictions that made grown meteorologists cry. The kind of hurricane that separates the engineers from the architects, if you know what I mean. I spent the final 48 hours before landfall helping neighbors secure their properties, or at least trying to. You ever watch someone attempt to hurricane-proof a house with duct tape and good intentions? It's like watching someone try to stop a freight train with a butterfly net. The sound hit first, not wind. That comes later. It's this low, rumbling growl that starts somewhere deep in your chest and works its way into your bones, like the earth itself is clearing its throat before delivering very bad news. Then the winds arrived. For 6 hours, Hurricane Delilah turned Coral Springs Estates into her personal demolition project. I wrote it out in my reinforced safe room, listening to the symphony of destruction outside. The howling wind, the percussion section of flying debris, and the occasional cymbal crash of another million-dollar dream becoming expensive kindling. When dawn broke, I opened my front door to a scene from an apocalypse movie. 47 of 52 homes in our community had suffered major damage. Total losses, partial collapses, roofs scattered across 3 counties like confetti from hell, cars flattened under oak trees, boats in swimming pools. One house had simply vanished, leaving behind a foundation and a very confused flamingo lawn ornament. My house? Not a scratch, standing there like it had just survived a light spring breeze. The acrid smell of destruction filled the air, splintered wood, insulation, and that metallic scent of twisted metal. But around my property, just the clean smell of salt air and victory. Vivian's mansion, 3 lots down, looked like it had been through a blender. The roof had relocated to somewhere near Jacksonville. The walls had decided to become individual boards again. Her pearl-white Mercedes sat under what used to be her oak tree, now resembling a very expensive accordion. Within an hour, I had 8 families camping in my living room. My generator hummed contentedly, providing power while the rest of the neighborhood looked like a blackout zone. Clean water flowed from my taps while everyone else was collecting rainwater in buckets. "Jake," said Mrs. Henderson, clutching a coffee mug I'd handed her, "how is your house the only one that made it?" Good question. Great question, actually. I spent the next week using my engineering background to help neighbors document damage for insurance claims. That's when I remembered something from my construction law classes. Insurance companies in Florida have 30 days to investigate claims and 90 days to pay valid ones. I started teaching my neighbors to photograph everything, document every conversation, because I had a sinking feeling they'd need all the ammunition they could get. And that's when I started noticing patterns that made my stomach clench like a fist. Hurricane straps that weren't actually strapped to anything. Roof trusses held together with what appeared to be Elmer's glue and wishful thinking. Foundation work that looked solid from the surface but crumbled at the first real test. This wasn't hurricane damage. This was construction fraud exposed by hurricane force. Every house built by Blackwood Development, 34 homes in our community, had failed catastrophically. Not just damaged. Failed, like they'd been designed to collapse at the first sign of trouble. I started creating detailed engineering reports for each family documenting exactly what had gone wrong and why. Photos, measurements, material analysis. If insurance companies wanted to play games, I'd give them science. Meanwhile, the insurance adjusters arrived like vultures in business suits. "I'm sorry, Mr. Peterson," I overheard one adjuster tell my neighbor. "Your policy covers hurricane damage, but this appears to be pre-existing structural inadequacy. We can't cover construction defects." That phrase, construction defects, kept popping up in every conversation, every denial letter, every frustrated phone call. But here's where things got interesting. I presented my engineering analysis to 3 insurance companies, proving their denials were bogus. Suddenly, claims that had been rejected for construction defects were getting approved. My neighbors started getting checks. That's when Vivian emerged from whatever hotel she'd been hiding in. She surveyed the destruction with the expression of someone who'd just discovered her lottery ticket was 1 number off. Then she looked at my intact house, and I watched something shift behind her eyes, something calculating and desperate. "Neighbors," she called out, her voice carrying across the debris field. "I think we need to ask ourselves some hard questions about what really happened here." Mrs. Chen, picking through what used to be her kitchen, looked up. "What do you mean, Vivian?" "I mean," Vivian said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "doesn't anyone find it suspicious that only one house survived? That Jake somehow knew exactly how to prepare for this specific storm?" The taste of bitter irony filled my mouth. Here was the woman whose husband had built these death traps, standing in the wreckage, and she was pointing fingers at the one guy who'd actually done things right. "Maybe he had advance warning," she continued, watching my face carefully. "Maybe he knew something about this hurricane that meteorologists didn't." And just like that, Vivian Blackwood planted the first seed of the conspiracy theory that would nearly destroy my life. 2 weeks after the hurricane, Vivian's whisper campaign had grown into a full-blown social media wildfire. It started innocently enough. A Facebook post in the Coral Springs Community Watch group, just asking questions about the storm damage patterns. Doesn't anyone else find it odd that one house survived when everyone else's were destroyed? What did Jake Morrison know that the rest of us didn't? Within 48 hours, that post had 300 comments and 150 shares. The conspiracy theorists had found their new favorite toy. Enter Crystal Moonbeam, yes, that's her real name, I checked, a local weather influencer with 50,000 TikTok followers who specialized in turning meteorological events into government cover-ups. Crystal had pink hair, crystals hanging from every possible surface, and the firm belief that the National Weather Service was controlled by lizard people. "Friends," Crystal announced in a video filmed outside my house, "what we're seeing here in Coral Springs is clear evidence of localized weather manipulation. Notice how this one house survived while all others were destroyed. This is what selective atmospheric targeting looks like." The comments section exploded. "Weather weapons, government testing." How much did they pay him to be the test house? Meanwhile, I was busy fighting a different battle. Armed with my engineering reports and a briefcase full of evidence, I was systematically dismantling insurance company denials. Every claim they'd rejected for construction defects, I proved was actually hurricane damage to defectively constructed homes. Mrs. Peterson got her $180,000 settlement after I showed her adjuster that her roof failure was caused by fake hurricane straps, literal tinfoil painted to look like steel. The Hendersons received $240,000 when I documented how their foundation had been poured with sand-heavy concrete that dissolved like sugar in the storm surge. My dining room table had become mission control for the neighborhood's insurance war. Stacks of engineering reports, photos, material analysis charts, and victory letters from insurance companies who'd suddenly discovered their mistakes in denying valid claims. That's when things got weird. I came home from work one Tuesday to find Vivian standing in my driveway with a clipboard, a measuring tape, and what appeared to be some kind of electromagnetic field detector, basically a radio with extra antennas and blinking lights. "Afternoon, Jake," she said, not looking up from her device, which was beeping like a smoke detector having an anxiety attack. "Just conducting some atmospheric readings around your property." "Atmospheric readings?" "Mm-hmm." She made notes on her clipboard. "Checking for unusual electromagnetic signatures. Residual weather modification energy." I stared at her. This was the woman who used to measure grass height with a ruler. Now she was LARPing as a ghost hunter for weather patterns. "Vivian, that's a metal detector from Harbor Freight. I can see the price tag." She looked up with the serene confidence of someone who'd completely divorced reality. "The electromagnetic anomalies around your property are quite significant, Jake. Almost like you had advance warning about the storm's exact path." That's when I realized what was happening. Vivian wasn't just spreading conspiracy theories for fun. She was building a legal case. See, I'd been thinking like an engineer, focusing on facts and evidence. But Vivian was thinking like a desperate woman facing financial ruin. Her husband's construction company had built 34 houses that had catastrophically failed. If families started suing for construction defects instead of accepting insurance denials, Blackwood Development was looking at $50 million in liability. But if she could prove I'd somehow caused or directed the hurricane damage, then the failures weren't construction defects. They were the result of my weather manipulation. Crazy? Absolutely. Legally viable? In Florida? You'd be surprised. The smell of desperation was starting to overpower her expensive perfume. "You know what I think, Jake?" Vivian continued, making more notes while her metal detector beeped at a drainage pipe. "I think you knew exactly what this storm would do. I think you prepared your house specifically because you had information the rest of us didn't." "Yeah," I said. "It's called structural engineering. You should try it sometime." Her smile was sharper than a property tax assessment. "We'll see what the other residents think when they learn about your unusual preparations." That evening, I found identical flyers in every mailbox on Sycamore Lane. Neighborhood safety meeting, discussing suspicious storm survival patterns and potential weather manipulation technology. Tuesday, 7 p.m., Community Center. The flyer included photos of my house's hurricane modifications with helpful arrows pointing to unusual antenna-like structures, my roof strapping, and suspicious electromagnetic equipment, my generator. At the bottom, in Comic Sans font that somehow made it more ominous, "Paid for by concerned citizens for atmospheric truth." I called my insurance agent that night, not for my house, for liability coverage, because when your HOA president starts accusing you of controlling hurricanes, you're either going to need a lawyer or a psychiatrist, maybe both. The taste of stale coffee lingered in my mouth as I realized this was just the beginning. Vivian had found her angle, and she was going to ride this weather conspiracy theory all the way to bankruptcy court if it meant avoiding responsibility for her husband's construction fraud. Game on. The community meeting was standing room only. Apparently, accusing your neighbor of hurricane manipulation is excellent marketing for public gatherings. I arrived fashionably late to find Crystal Moonbeam had transformed our community center into the set of a low-budget X-Files episode. She'd brought a PowerPoint presentation titled "Weather Warfare in Waterfront Communities," and enough crystals to power a New Age gift shop. The air conditioning was broken naturally, so the room smelled like nervous sweat and the kind of desperation that makes people believe in lizard people. About 60 residents packed into folding chairs, all staring at me like I'd personally ruined their property values. Vivian stood at the podium wearing what I can only describe as serious conspiracy theorist chic, a navy blazer that screamed authority and a concerned expression that belonged in a pharmaceutical commercial. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "We're here tonight because we need answers. Jake Morrison's house was the only one to survive Hurricane Delilah completely intact. The question is, how did he know?" Crystal took over with the enthusiasm of someone who'd finally found an audience for her weather modification theories. Her presentation included grainy photos of my roof strapping labeled as HARP-style atmospheric manipulation devices, and my solar panels identified as ionospheric heating arrays. My personal favorite slide, a photo of my weather vane with the caption, "Directional Storm Steering Apparatus." "Friends," Crystal announced, clicking to a slide that showed swirling clouds with suspicious red arrows. "What we're witnessing is clear evidence of localized weather control technology. Jake Morrison didn't just survive this hurricane, he directed it away from his property and onto ours." The murmurs started low and built like a gathering storm. Mrs. Patterson, whose pool house had been relocated to another county, raised her hand. "Are you saying Jake caused our damage?" "I'm saying," Vivian interjected smoothly, "that Jake had information and technology that he didn't share with his neighbors. Information that could have saved our homes." That's when I stood up. The room went dead silent except for the broken air conditioning rattling like a death threat. "Vivian," I said, my voice carrying across the stuffy room, "you want to know how I knew my house would survive? It's because I read the building codes. You know, those pesky engineering standards your husband ignored when he built half this neighborhood." The color drained from her face faster than floodwater through a cracked foundation. I'd been investigating Blackwood development for 3 weeks, and what I'd found made my skin crawl. I pulled out my phone and connected it to their projector. Time for my own presentation. "Let's talk about real weather manipulation," I said, clicking to my first slide. A side-by-side comparison of building code requirements versus what Blackwood development actually installed. Vivian's husband used hurricane straps made of tin foil. Literally, tin foil painted to look like galvanized steel. Gasps echoed through the room. I clicked to the next slide. Foundation specifications called for reinforced concrete. Blackwood used regular concrete mixed with 50% sand. It dissolved in the storm surge like sugar in coffee. More gasps. The mood was shifting faster than barometric pressure before a tornado. Roof trusses were supposed to be secured with galvanized bolts every 16 inches. Blackwood used construction adhesive and wood screws. Click. Here's a photo of Mrs. Henderson's roof truss after the storm. Anyone see any bolts? The room erupted. 60 voices demanding answers, explanations, accountability. Vivian tried to regain control, but the crowd had smelled blood in the water. That's when I dropped the nuclear bomb. Here's the interesting part, I said, clicking to a document I'd obtained through public records requests. Vivian knew about these construction defects. She received a county inspector's report 18 months ago detailing code violations in 34 Blackwood-built homes. I let that sink in while the room processed the implications. She chose to suppress that report rather than force her husband's company to make repairs. She prioritized protecting Blackwood Development's reputation over protecting your lives. The silence was deafening. You could hear people's worldviews cracking like faulty foundation work. Vivian's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Crystal Moonbeam was frantically packing up her crystals, apparently realizing that actual fraud was less marketable than weather conspiracy theories. "This is ridiculous," Vivian finally sputtered. "Jake is trying to distract from his weather manipulation by attacking my family's business." But it was too late. Mrs. Patterson stood up, her voice shaking with rage. "My grandson was in my pool house when your husband's shoddy construction nearly killed him. You knew those buildings were death traps and said nothing?" The room exploded into chaos, 60 angry voices demanding answers from the woman who'd been their trusted leader for 6 years, accusations flying like hurricane debris. Vivian's conspiracy theory had backfired spectacularly. Instead of making me the villain, she'd exposed herself as the real threat to community safety. She grabbed her purse and fled through the back exit, leaving behind 60 furious neighbors and one very satisfied structural engineer. The taste of victory was sweeter than I'd expected. 3 days after the community meeting from hell, my doorbell rang at 6 a.m. I opened it to find a woman in a crisp FBI windbreaker holding a badge and what appeared to be a very thick folder. "Mr. Morrison, Special Agent Sarah Chen, Federal Bureau of Investigation. We need to talk." My first thought was that Vivian had somehow convinced the feds I was running a weather modification ring out of my garage. My second thought was that I needed more coffee for whatever conversation was about to happen. "This about the hurricane conspiracy theories?" I asked, stepping aside to let her in. Agent Chen shook her head, settling into my kitchen chair with the folder. "It's about insurance fraud, specifically a pattern we've been tracking across multiple states involving HOA presidents and construction companies." She opened the folder, revealing surveillance photos of Vivian meeting with various men in business suits, bank records, insurance claim documents, more paper than most small libraries. "Vivian Blackwood isn't just covering for her husband's shoddy construction," Chen continued. "She's been running a sophisticated insurance fraud scheme for 8 years across 3 states. The coffee maker gurgled to life as Chen laid out the evidence like a poker player revealing a royal flush. "Here's how it works," she explained. "Blackwood Development builds houses with deliberately inferior materials. Vivian becomes HOA president in the community. When a major storm hits, the houses fail catastrophically due to construction defects." She pulled out a series of insurance claims from Louisiana, Texas, and now Florida, all following the same pattern. Vivian then files massive insurance claims for unprecedented storm damage while suppressing any evidence of construction defects. When insurance companies investigate, she provides glowing reviews of Blackwood's work and blames the damage on unusual weather patterns. The coffee finished brewing, filling my kitchen with the smell of morning clarity. I poured 2 cups while processing the implications. "But this time was different," I said. "My house survived." "Exactly. Your house proved that proper construction could withstand the hurricane. That made the construction defects obvious to investigators." Chen accepted the coffee gratefully. Vivian panicked. She needed an explanation for why her husband's houses failed while yours didn't. Hence the weather manipulation conspiracy. It wasn't just desperation, it was criminal conspiracy to cover up insurance fraud. Chen pulled out more documents. "We've identified 47 fraudulent claims totaling $8.2 million across 3 states. Each time, Vivian used her HOA authority to suppress engineering reports and intimidate residents who questioned the construction quality." I thought about Mrs. Patterson's near-death experience, the Henderson family camping in my living room, all the families whose lives had been shattered by homes that were designed to fail. She's been using natural disasters to steal millions from insurance companies while people lost everything, I said. And when you exposed the construction defects at that community meeting, you threatened to unravel 8 years of fraud. Chen closed the folder. That's when she made her biggest mistake. She pulled out her phone and played a recording. Vivian's voice, crystal clear. I don't care what it takes, Gerald. File that lawsuit against Morrison, claim weather manipulation, act of God, alien invasion if you have to. We need something that explains why our houses failed and his didn't. The recording continued. If we can prove Morrison caused the damage somehow, then it's not construction defects. It's his fault. The insurance companies will have to pay and we're off the hook. My stomach dropped as I realized the full scope of what I was dealing with. This wasn't just about hurricane damage or construction fraud. Vivian was planning to destroy my life to cover up a multi-state criminal enterprise. She's going to file that $13 million lawsuit, I said. Chen nodded grimly. Tomorrow morning, weather manipulation, negligent storm preparation, intentional infliction of property damage. She's already hired 3 expert witnesses willing to testify that residential hurricane modifications can redirect storm paths. The taste of expensive legal bills filled my mouth. But here's the thing, Mr. Morrison, we want her to file that lawsuit because the moment she does, we'll have her on additional charges of malicious prosecution and conspiracy to defraud. And we'll need your help to make sure she goes down for all of it. Agent Chen stood up, leaving the folder on my kitchen table. Think about it. We'll be in touch. As she left, I stared at the evidence scattered across my table. Vivian wasn't just a corrupt HOA president. She was the mastermind of a multi-million-dollar fraud operation that had been destroying lives for nearly a decade, and I was about to become the key witness who brought the whole thing crashing down. The next morning, my kitchen table looked like the nerve center of a military operation. FBI agent Chen had returned with reinforcements. Forensic accountant Rebecca Liu, Assistant U.S. Attorney Marcus Washington, and enough legal documents to kill a small forest. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with the scent of highlighter markers as we mapped out 8 years of Vivian's criminal enterprise across 3 states. Rebecca had spreadsheets that would make NASA jealous, tracking every fraudulent claim, every suppressed engineering report, every dollar that had disappeared into offshore accounts. The pattern is beautiful in its simplicity, Rebecca explained, pointing to color-coded charts that showed the fraud timeline. Blackwood Development builds defective houses, major storm hits, houses fail catastrophically. Vivian suppresses construction defect evidence while filing massive insurance claims. Marcus Washington, the prosecutor, was already salivating over the case. $8.2 million in fraudulent claims, conspiracy across state lines, witness intimidation, obstruction of justice. We're looking at federal racketeering charges. But first, we needed to let Vivian hang herself with her own weather manipulation lawsuit. She filed this morning, Chen announced, sliding a legal document across my table. $13 million for intentional weather manipulation causing property damage to surrounding structures. I read through the complaint, my engineering brain struggling to process the technical gibberish Vivian's lawyers had cobbled together. According to their expert witnesses, my hurricane straps created electromagnetic interference with natural storm patterns, and my impact windows somehow redirected wind flow to increase damage to neighboring properties. It's complete nonsense, I said. Legally actionable nonsense, Marcus corrected. The moment she filed this frivolous lawsuit to cover up insurance fraud, she committed multiple felonies. Now we just need to prove she knew it was frivolous. That's where I came in. Chen handed me a wire. Apparently, I was about to become an undercover federal informant. The plan was simple. Get Vivian to admit on tape that her weather manipulation lawsuit was designed to cover up construction fraud. Remember, Chen coached me as we tested the recording equipment, we need her to explicitly connect the lawsuit to covering up Blackwood Development's liability. Get her talking about protecting her husband's company. The wire felt cold against my chest as I walked to Vivian's temporary rental house that afternoon. She'd moved there after her mansion became a pile of expensive debris, and the cramped space clearly wasn't agreeing with her usual imperious demeanor. "Jake," she said, opening the door with a smile that could cut glass. "How nice of you to visit." Her living room smelled like desperation masked with expensive candles. Legal documents covered every surface, and her laptop screen showed she'd been researching weather modification technology like a college student cramming for finals. "Vivian, we need to talk," I said. "This lawsuit is insane. Weather manipulation, really?" She gestured for me to sit on a couch that probably cost more than my truck. "I know it sounds unusual, Jake, but my experts are very confident about their findings." "What experts? The lady with pink hair who thinks lizard people control the weather service?" Vivian's laugh was as genuine as a $3 bill. "Dr. Hartwell from the University of Miami, very respected atmospheric physicist. He's prepared to testify that residential modifications can absolutely influence local weather patterns." I'd looked up Dr. Hartwell the night before. His atmospheric physics degree came from an online university that also offered certificates in crystal healing and alien communication, but I played along. "Even if that's true," I said, "don't you think this lawsuit makes Blackwood development look bad? I mean, if people start investigating construction quality..." And there it was, the shift in her expression that told me the wire was about to pay off. "Jake," she said, leaning forward conspiratorially, "between you and me, Gerald's company cut some corners over the years. Hurricane codes are expensive to follow properly, but if we can prove you caused the damage through weather manipulation, then it's not construction defects anymore. It's your fault." My heart hammered against the wire as she continued. "The insurance companies will have to pay out. Gerald's company is protected from liability and everyone wins." "Well, everyone except you, but you should have thought about that before you decided to play God with Mother Nature." She actually believed her own nonsense. Or at least, she'd convinced herself she believed it. "What about the families who lost everything?" I asked. Vivian waved dismissively. "They'll get their insurance money once we prove you caused the damage. It's a win-win situation." Except for the part where she was committing multiple felonies to cover up 8 years of fraud, but I didn't mention that. I left her house with enough recorded evidence to put her away for a decade. As I walked back to my car, the taste of justice was already sweetening the Florida afternoon air. Phase 1 complete. Now we just had to wait for Vivian to dig her hole deep enough that even she couldn't climb out. 2 weeks after my wire recording session, Vivian's desperation reached new heights of spectacular stupidity. It started with the private investigator, a guy named Buster who looked like he'd learned surveillance techniques from 1980s TV shows. He followed me to work in a beat-up Crown Victoria that screamed, "Definitely not a cop car," so loudly it could be heard from space. Buster's idea of covert surveillance involved parking directly across from my house and taking photos through a telephoto lens the size of a small telescope. My neighbors started calling the police about the creepy guy taking pictures of children, until I had to explain he was actually taking pictures of me for a weather manipulation lawsuit. That conversation was exactly as weird as it sounds. Meanwhile, Vivian had discovered social media. Her Facebook page transformed into a weather conspiracy clearinghouse that would have made Ancient Aliens producers weep with envy. Daily posts about atmospheric terrorism, sharing articles about government weather weapons, and photos of my house with increasingly creative theories about how my gutters were secretly storm direction controllers. The smell of her desperation was so strong it was practically visible from orbit. But the real escalation came when she started targeting my work. I arrived at the office Monday morning to find my boss, Tom Bradley, looking like someone had told him his dog was secretly a tax auditor. "Jake," he said, closing his office door with the careful precision of a man handling explosives, "I got some interesting calls over the weekend." Apparently, Vivian had contacted 3 of our biggest clients with detailed explanations of my weather manipulation activities. She'd helpfully provided copies of her lawsuit, highlighting the parts about electromagnetic interference and atmospheric terrorism. "She told Henderson Construction that hiring you was a liability risk," Tom continued, "said you might redirect hurricanes toward their projects out of spite." The taste of bitter irony filled my mouth. Vivian was so desperate to avoid responsibility for her husband's construction fraud that she was willing to destroy my livelihood with weather conspiracy theories. "Tom, you know this is insane, right?" "Of course it's insane," he replied. "But insane doesn't mean it won't cost us clients. Henderson already postponed the Miami Beach project pending further investigation into potential atmospheric manipulation risks." That afternoon, things got worse. I came home to find graffiti spray-painted across my garage door, "Weather Witch," in bright red letters that could probably be seen from the International Space Station. My security cameras caught the vandals, three middle-aged women in Coral Springs Truth Seekers t-shirts, led by Crystal Moonbeam herself. They'd also left dead fish on my doorstep, arranged in what I assume was supposed to be some kind of anti-weather manipulation symbol, but looked more like a modern art installation gone horribly wrong. The sound of my phone ringing at 3 a.m. became a regular occurrence, anonymous callers breathing heavily before launching into theories about atmospheric weapons and government cover-ups. One particularly creative caller accused me of working for big weather to create artificial scarcity in the hurricane insurance market. I'd installed call blocking after the first week, but they kept using different numbers. Apparently, harassment technology had advanced faster than blocking technology. Agent Chen called that Thursday with an update that made my blood pressure spike like storm surge. Vivian's hired a second expert witness, she reported, Dr. Margaret Thornfield from the Institute for Atmospheric Studies. I Googled Dr. Thornfield immediately. Her institute was actually a WordPress blog run out of a strip mall in Gainesville, and her credentials included degrees from universities that existed only in her imagination. But she had a very professional headshot and enough technical-sounding gibberish to impress people who thought weather came from sky wizards. She's prepared to testify that your solar panels create ionospheric heating effects that can redirect hurricanes, Chen continued. Complete nonsense, but it sounds scientific enough to confuse a jury. The harassment campaign expanded beyond my house. Vivian's supporters started showing up at community events I attended, filming me with their phones while shouting questions about weather weapons and atmospheric terrorism. The local Starbucks became a no-go zone after 3 separate incidents involving conspiracy theorists and thrown pastries. My favorite escalation was the protest outside my house. 12 people with handmade signs reading "Stop Weather Control" and "Atmospheric Justice Now" marching in a circle on the sidewalk while chanting something that sounded like, "Hey, hey, ho, ho, weather manipulation has got to go." The chant didn't really work rhythmically, but they committed to it with the dedication of true believers. Mrs. Patterson, who'd initially been grateful for my engineering help after the hurricane, now crossed the street when she saw me coming. The Henderson family, who'd received their insurance settlement because of my reports, suddenly found reasons to avoid eye contact at the grocery store. Vivian's conspiracy theory was working. She was successfully turning me into a pariah while building her legal defense against fraud charges. But what she didn't know was that every harassing phone call, every piece of graffiti, every false report to my employer was being documented by federal investigators as additional evidence of witness intimidation and obstruction of justice. Vivian was so focused on destroying my reputation that she didn't notice the legal noose tightening around her neck. By week 3 of Vivian's Scorched Earth campaign, she'd graduated from local harassment to international conspiracy stardom. It started when she appeared on Truth Seekers Network, a podcast that specialized in turning everyday events into evidence of global conspiracies. The host, a guy named Derek who apparently believed the moon was a hologram, gave Vivian a full hour to explain how I represented the advanced guard of atmospheric terrorism sweeping America. "This isn't just about one neighborhood," Vivian declared over the airwaves, her voice carrying the fervor of someone who'd completely lost touch with reality. Jake Morrison is part of a coordinated weather warfare program designed to destroy traditional American communities and force people into government-controlled housing. Within 48 hours, that podcast had been downloaded 200,000 times. Conspiracy forums across the internet exploded with theories about neighborhood weather manipulation. My house address got posted on 17 different websites dedicated to exposing atmospheric terrorism. The smell of paranoia was becoming as thick as humidity before a thunderstorm. Then the media circus arrived in full force. News vans from 3 networks parked outside my house like they were covering a presidential assassination. Reporters knocked on my door every morning asking for comments about allegations of residential weather control. The local NBC affiliate ran a segment titled, "Florida Man Accused of Hurricane Manipulation," that made me sound like a supervillain from a bad comic book. But the real escalation came when Vivian connected with international disinformation networks. Agent Chen showed up at my door Friday morning with printouts of Russian social media posts, sharing Vivian's story as evidence of American weather warfare testing on civilian populations. Chinese state media picked it up as proof that U.S. government conducts atmospheric experiments on own citizens. "Congratulations," Chen said dryly, handing me a folder full of foreign press coverage. "You're now an international incident. Vivian's conspiracy theory is being used by hostile nations to attack American credibility." The irony was suffocating. Vivian was so desperate to avoid responsibility for construction fraud that she'd accidentally created an international propaganda victory for America's enemies. My personal favorite was the article in a North Korean newspaper describing me as capitalist weather terrorist, destroying worker housing with atmospheric weapons. Apparently, proper hurricane construction was now evidence of imperialist oppression. Meanwhile, the harassment reached levels that would have impressed professional stalkers. I came home Tuesday to find 50 people protesting outside my house. Not 12 amateur conspiracy theorists with handmade signs. 50 organized protesters with professionally printed banners reading "End Atmospheric Oppression" and "Weather Justice Now." They'd coordinated with conspiracy groups from 3 states. Some had driven 8 hours to stand in my front yard chanting about ionospheric manipulation and electromagnetic terrorism. The sound of their unified chanting was like listening to a cult practice session. Local police arrived to manage the crowd, but couldn't do much since they were technically protesting on public property. Officer Martinez, who'd been handling my harassment complaints for weeks, looked like a man who'd given up trying to understand his job. "Mr. Morrison," he said, exhaustion heavy in his voice, "I've been a cop for 15 years. I've dealt with drug dealers, gang members, and armed robbers. But this weather manipulation thing, this is the weirdest case I've ever worked." The protesters stayed for 6 hours, taking shifts so the chanting never stopped. My neighbors, the ones who hadn't been completely turned against me, started closing their blinds and avoiding their front yards. The entire street felt like a war zone where the war was being fought with megaphones and delusion. That's when Vivian made her biggest mistake yet. In a moment of supreme arrogance, she held a press conference outside the community center. National media attended, including CNN and Fox News, drawn by the international attention her story had generated. "Ladies and gentlemen," Vivian announced, standing behind a podium like she was running for president of the Flat Earth Society. "What we're witnessing in Coral Springs is a coordinated attack on American families by forces that want to control our weather, our homes, and our lives." She'd prepared a PowerPoint presentation for the media, complete with diagrams showing how my hurricane straps created atmospheric vortex manipulation fields and my solar panels generated ionospheric heating disruption. But then she got cocky. "This conspiracy goes beyond Jake Morrison," she declared, her voice rising with evangelical fervor. "This is about a global cabal using weather weapons to destroy property values and force families from their homes. They want to collapse the housing market so they can buy everything cheap and control where Americans live." The reporters started asking pointed questions. Who was they? What evidence supported these claims? Where did she get her technical expertise in atmospheric physics? That's when Vivian's carefully constructed facade cracked like a poorly built foundation. "The evidence is obvious," she snapped at a CNN reporter. "Gerald's construction company built quality homes that survived every storm for 20 years until Jake Morrison moved in with his weather machines." Dead silence from the crowd as journalists realized she'd just admitted her husband's company was responsible for the failed houses. The taste of victory was sweeter than key lime pie. The federal courthouse in Miami had never seen anything like it. 300 people gathered outside for Vivian's arraignment, creating the most bizarre crowd in legal history. FBI agents, hurricane victims, conspiracy theorists, international media, and curious tourists who thought they'd stumbled into some kind of weather-themed street festival. The smell of ocean breeze mixed with the tension of a crowd that couldn't decide whether they were witnessing justice or the suppression of atmospheric truth. News crews from 17 countries had set up equipment that looked more sophisticated than NASA mission control. I arrived with Agent Chen and a security detail that made me feel like either a celebrity or a witness protection candidate. The conspiracy theorists immediately started chanting "weather terrorist," while hurricane victims applauded and reporters shoved microphones toward anyone willing to discuss ionospheric manipulation. "Mr. Morrison," shouted a BBC correspondent, "do you have any comment on allegations that you work for a secret weather control organization?" "Yeah," I said, stopping at the courthouse steps. "I work for the secret organization known as Reading Building Codes. Very exclusive membership. You have to pass a basic engineering exam." The crowd's laughter was interrupted by Vivian's arrival. She stepped out of a black SUV wearing an orange jumpsuit that clashed spectacularly with her usual designer aesthetic. The conspiracy theorists cheered like she was Joan of Arc fighting atmospheric oppression. The hurricane victims booed like she'd personally stolen their homes. Vivian tried to give an impromptu press conference, but federal marshals hustled her toward the courthouse entrance before she could explain how my gutters controlled storm patterns. Inside, Judge Patricia Williams presided over a packed courtroom that felt more like a carnival than a legal proceeding. The gallery was split between conspiracy believers and fraud victims, with international media documenting every moment for a world fascinated by American weather paranoia. Prosecutor Marcus Washington stood to present the government's case, and the courtroom fell silent except for the soft hum of recording equipment. "Your Honor," Washington began, "the defendant stands accused of orchestrating an 8-year conspiracy to defraud insurance companies of $8.2 million through a scheme involving deliberately defective construction and fraudulent weather claims." He clicked to his first exhibit, a timeline showing Vivian's fraud pattern across Louisiana, Texas, and Florida. Each incident followed the same blueprint: defective construction, major storm, fraudulent insurance claims, suppression of engineering evidence. The defendant's husband, Gerald Blackwood, built houses using substandard materials while charging premium prices for hurricane-resistant construction. When storms exposed these defects, the defendant used her position as HOA president to cover up construction failures and blame damage on unprecedented weather events. Click. Photos of tinfoil hurricane straps painted to look like steel. Until Hurricane Delilah hit Coral Springs Estates, this scheme worked perfectly, but when Mr. Morrison's properly constructed house survived while Blackwood-built homes failed catastrophically, the construction defects became obvious. Click. Side-by-side photos of my intact house versus the neighborhood destruction. Faced with exposure, the defendant escalated to an even more audacious fraud. She filed a $13 million lawsuit claiming Mr. Morrison had manipulated the hurricane using residential weather control technology. The conspiracy theorists in the gallery murmured excitedly. Even here, even now, some of them still believed. Washington played my wire recording of Vivian explaining how the weather manipulation lawsuit would protect Blackwood Development from liability. Her voice filled the courtroom, crystal clear. "If we can prove you caused the damage through weather manipulation, then it's not construction defects anymore. It's your fault." Judge Williams raised an eyebrow that could have been seen from space. Then came my testimony. "Mr. Morrison," Washington asked, "in your professional opinion as a structural engineer, is it possible for residential hurricane modifications to control weather patterns?" "No," I said simply. "Weather systems contain more energy than every nuclear weapon on Earth combined. The idea that roof straps and solar panels could redirect a hurricane is like claiming you can steer a freight train by throwing ping-pong balls at it." The conspiracy theorists' murmurs grew louder. Judge Williams gavelled for order. "However," I continued, "it is absolutely possible to build houses that survive hurricanes if you follow proper construction codes instead of using fake materials and cutting corners to maximize profits." That's when Vivian's expensive defense attorney made his final desperate play. "Your Honor," he announced dramatically, "climate change has made weather patterns increasingly unpredictable. Perhaps residential modifications really can influence atmospheric conditions in ways we don't yet understand." The courtroom held its breath. This was his Hail Mary, his last chance to inject reasonable doubt into the conspiracy theory. Prosecutor Washington stood slowly, like a pitcher winding up for a fastball to end the World Series. "Your Honor," he said, his voice carrying across the silent courtroom, "the only thing my client controlled was her bank account, which she filled with money stolen from hurricane victims through 8 years of systematic fraud." The judge's gavel came down like thunder. "Mrs. Blackwood, you are hereby sentenced to 8 years in federal prison, plus full restitution of $8.2 million to fraud victims. Court is adjourned." The courtroom erupted. Hurricane victims cheered. Conspiracy theorists shouted about government cover-ups. International media rushed to file stories about the Florida weather manipulation trial. And Vivian Blackwood was led away in handcuffs, her weather conspiracy finally blown away by the winds of justice. 6 months after watching Vivian led away in handcuffs, I still get a warm feeling every time I drive past the federal prison where she's spending the next 8 years contemplating the difference between weather manipulation and construction fraud. Justice wasn't just served, it was delivered with federal efficiency and a side of poetic irony. Vivian got 8 years in prison plus $8.2 million in restitution. Gerald received 5 years plus $12 million in civil damages. Their assets were liquidated faster than conspiracy theories in a science classroom, with every penny going to families whose homes had been deliberately built to fail. But the sweetest victory? watching Vivian's mugshot on the evening news, orange jumpsuit replacing her designer blazers, while the reporter explained how her weather conspiracy lawsuit had actually exposed 8 years of multi-state fraud. The woman who'd tried to blame hurricanes on my solar panels was now famous for the most spectacular criminal backfire in HOA history. My kitchen table, once mission control for documenting fraud, became headquarters for the Coral Springs Hurricane Preparedness Initiative. Every Saturday morning, neighbors gathered to learn actual storm survival instead of atmospheric terrorism theories. Mrs. Patterson, who'd initially believed I controlled weather patterns, became my most enthusiastic convert. "Jake," she said during our third workshop, the smell of wood stain mixing with fresh coffee as we demonstrated proper window reinforcement, "I feel so stupid for believing you had weather machines when you were just following building codes." The sound of drills and hammers replaced conspiracy chanting as families retrofitted their rebuilt homes with real hurricane defenses. No more tinfoil masquerading as steel, actual galvanized materials installed to engineering standards that could survive Mother Nature's worst tantrums. Here's what I learned during this whole ordeal that might save your life. Always demand to see actual building materials during construction, not just contractor promises. Document everything with photos. Insurance companies love denying claims, but they hate photographic evidence. And remember, if someone accuses you of controlling the weather, they're probably hiding something much worse than fake hurricane straps. Dr. Sarah Chen, the meteorologist who defended me throughout the conspiracy madness, became more than a professional ally. We married in the same community center where Vivian once held her weather manipulation meetings. Our reception featured a hurricane preparedness demonstration instead of traditional cake cutting, because true love in Florida means building something together that can survive Category 5 winds. The national impact exceeded my wildest expectations. My congressional testimony led to the Hurricane Construction Fraud Prevention Act, requiring independent engineering inspections for all coastal construction. The FBI created a specialized task force for HOA-related insurance fraud, using Vivian's spectacular failure as their primary training case. Even Crystal Moonbeam found redemption. After witnessing real evidence versus conspiracy fiction, she pivoted her social media presence to exposing actual construction corruption. Her TikTok channel now teaches viewers how to identify substandard building materials instead of promoting lizard people theories. Character development nobody saw coming. My engineering business exploded after the trial. Families across 3 states hired me to inspect Blackwood-built homes, resulting in a $47 million class action settlement. I established the Morrison Foundation using my legal winnings, providing free engineering consultations for low-income coastal communities who deserve hurricane protection regardless of income level. Coral Springs Estates transformed from conspiracy battleground to model community. Our new HOA president, Mrs. Henderson, runs meetings with actual Roberts rules instead of weather manipulation accusations. Property values jumped 25% after we became known for superior storm preparedness rather than atmospheric terrorism. The community garden planted where Vivian's mansion once stood symbolizes growth from destruction. Neighbors who'd once accused each other of weather control now share vegetables and hurricane tips over garden fences. Every year on Hurricane Delilah's anniversary, we host the Science Over Conspiracy Festival, featuring meteorology presentations, engineering demonstrations, and zero discussions of ionospheric manipulation. Families statewide attend to learn real storm survival while enjoying barbecue that's definitely not weather weapon controlled. My house still stands as proof that proper engineering defeats both natural disasters and human greed. Sarah and I added a workshop where we teach hurricane construction to anyone willing to learn that weather comes from atmospheric physics, not neighborhood feuds. The bottom line? Documentation destroys desperation, science crushes conspiracy, and communities united by facts are stronger than any storm or any corrupt HOA president with delusions of weather control. Share your HOA nightmare stories below. Whether involving weather accusations or regular corruption, we want every detail. Subscribe to HOA Tales for more stories about ordinary people using courage and common sense to defeat fraud, conspiracy theories, and power-hungry neighbors who think physics is optional. Remember, proper preparation prevents both property damage and prosecution for atmospheric terrorism.